The wrong man, the sky was gray, hanging low over the tarmac like it didn't want to let go of the day. Soft drizzle fell across the runway as private jets fleeing silently in a row. Engines cold, like sleeping beasts waiting to be woken by someone. Important, on the far end of the private airstrip near Los Angeles, a quiet man in a plain sweater and jeans stepped out of a modest black car. His shoes were dusty. His luggage was a simple roller bag, the kind you'd expect to see in any busy airport, not the kind expected in a world where suitcases were carried for you and champagne was served. Before takeoff, his name was Sundar. And he looked like just another traveler who got lost on his way to the economy terminal. He didn't walk with the arrogance of the wealthy or the confidence of someone used to luxury. Instead, he seemed careful, as if the world around him might break if he stepped too hard. He smiled politely at the first employee he saw, a young man in a crisp uniform who stood near the jet with a tablet in hand. But that smile was not returned. The man with the tablet, whose name tag read Bradley, blinked slowly at Sundar, then gave him a once-over that lingered too long. His lip curled slightly, not quite a sneer, not quite a smirk, but something close to both. He held the tablet against his chest and tilted his head. "Sir, this area is for private jet passengers only," Bradley said, his voice sharp like the crease in his pants. "If you're looking for commercial flights, the main terminal is 2 miles west. You'll need to call a cab or shuttle." Sundar's smile faltered, but only a little. "I'm aware," he said softly. "I have a flight booked here." Bradley didn't check the tablet. He didn't ask for a name. He just looked at Sundar's plain outfit, the old bag, the absence of a designer watch or sunglasses, and he made a decision. "I don't think so," he said, louder now. "This tarmac is reserved for certain types of clients. This isn't. A rideshare pickup? Maybe take a moment and double-check your information." Sundar paused. The drizzle touched his forehead, cold and light. He took a breath, not anger, but to gather something quieter patience. He reached into his coat and pulled out his phone, scrolling carefully. Behind him, another car door opened, and a second man in a suit stepped out. He moved toward Sundar. Quickly, waving, "Pichai. Apologies for the delay," the man said. "We were tracking your arrival. Everything's ready." Bradley's face shifted. Wait," he stuttered, glancing down at the tablet for the first time. There it was, Sundar Pichai. The name, the time, the jet, the entire line of information that had been waiting for confirmation. Sundar nodded politely to the man in the suit, then turned back to Bradley, his voice still calm. "I believe this is the correct gate," he said, for a second time. Stilled, Bradley's cheeks turned pale, then red, then pale again. The realization crashed down on him like ice water. He had just dismissed the CEO of one of the most powerful companies in the world because he didn't like the look of his shoes. "Sir," Bradley began, but he didn't know what to say next. He didn't have the words. Apologies don't come easy when they're tangled in shame. Sundar could have walked away then. He could have boarded the plane and left the awkward moment behind like dust. But a D and single quotes T dot instead. He looked at Bradley again, this time with a gaze that wasn't angry, wasn't cold. It was curious, kind, even gentle. "Do you treat everyone like this who doesn't look the part?" he asked, not as a challenge, but as a question full of something deeper. A question with weight. Bradley swallowed. The man in the suit shifted uncomfortably behind them, unsure if he should interrupt. The drizzle began to pick up, wind brushing past them in soft, damp gusts. "I didn't know who you were," Bradley said finally, his voice low. "You didn't look like someone who'd fly private?" "That's the point," Sundar replied. "You didn't need to know who I was, but you decided what I wasn't?" The silence stretched between them like a bridge no one wanted to cross. In that silence, something cracked not between Sundar and Bradley, but inside Bradley himself. A wall that had gone unnoticed for years started to crumble. Sundar looked away then, toward the jet now humming softly as its systems powered up. He nodded once more to the man in the suit and began walking. His steps were as quiet as when he'd arrived, but this time Bradley didn't look away. He watched until Sundar disappeared into the cabin. The door closing gently behind him, a chill ran through him that had nothing to do with the rain. He could have yelled, Bradley thought. He could have ruined me in one sentence. But I do single quotes T dot as the jet began to roll forward. The rain fell harder. But inside Bradley, the weather had shifted. He looked down at the tablet, but the names and numbers there felt meaningless now. What mattered wasn't on the screen. It had never been dot up in the sky. The jet soared into the clouds. Inside, Sundar sat by the window, watching the grayness give way to light. The memory of Bradley's face lingered in his mind, but not with bitterness. He had seen that look before, on strangers, on colleagues, even on himself once. It was the look of someone meeting their own reflection for the first time and not liking what they saw. He knew this story wasn't over. He had meetings to attend, people to meet, decisions to make, but something else had started on that tarmac. Something unexpected. And like many things in Sundar's life, it wasn't about power or money, it was about how people see each other. And what happens when they finally learn to see right? Asterisk, a call that changes everything through rain, didn't stop for hours. It became a steady curtain over the small private airport, softening the edges of the world, turning harsh outlines into faded shapes. Bradley sat on a bench near the staff lounge, his tablet shut off, screen black like a mirror he didn't want to look into. The memory of Sundar's voice, quiet but strong, looped in his mind. Louder than any storm. He had dealt with hundreds of passengers in his 2 years at this job. Celebrities, politicians, business magnates. Most came with noise-expensive shoes clicking sharply, sunglasses worn like armor, voices heavy with entitlement. He had learned to judge them quickly. Efficiency was his excuse. But today had broken. Something open inside him. He wasn't thinking about efficiency anymore. He was thinking about the man who arrived like no one and left like someone he'd never forget. He didn't go home when his shift ended. Instead, he sat there in the rain-stained silence, long after the other employees had clocked out. He thought of his father, who used to say, "You don't need to know someone's name to treat them right." Bradley hadn't heard his father's voice in years. They hadn't spoken since the last fight, and that silence had hardened into a wall between them. His phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He almost ignored it, assuming it was another notification, another forgotten appointment or promotional email. But something told him to look. The caller had just said, "Dad." He stared at it. His thumb hovered. It buzzed again. He answered, "Hello?" His voice cracked. Unused to that word, coming from him, thought there was a pause on the other end. A breath. Then, a voice he hadn't heard in almost 6 years. Bradley, his father said, his tone cautious, as if unsure if he would be welcomed. "I heard something today, something I thought you should know." Bradley sat up straight. The lounge around him had gone still, only the hum of a vending machine breaking the silence. "What do you mean?" he asked. "Someone from your airport called me, said your name, said you were working there." His father cleared his throat. "Said you were involved in something with Sundar Pichai." The name hit like thunder. How did they know you?" "Because someone remembered I used to teach," his father said. "A student of mine now works in media. They called me, asking for a comment, said you might be in a story soon. It's not out yet, but it's coming." Bradley's hands went cold. "I didn't do anything to make news," he whispered. I was rude, and then he was kind. That's all." His father was quiet for a moment. Then came the words Bradley didn't expect. "Sometimes, son, that is news. Real stories aren't just about explosions and scandals. They're about moments, the kind that show who we really are." Bradley closed his eyes. It was too much. The weight of the day, the surprise of his father's voice, the sudden reach of a private mistake echoing beyond the tarmac, it all pressed on his chest like a stone. "Dad," he said softly, "I think I messed up." His father didn't interrupt. He let the silence stretch, patient. "I saw him," Bradley continued. "He looked normal, and I thought that meant he wasn't worth my time. I thought you didn't belong there. And when I realized who he was, I felt like the ground fell out from under me. His father's voice came gently through the line. Do you know why Sundar started in engineering? He asked. Bradley blinked. What? He was curious. His father said, he wanted to build things that help people. He didn't start rich. He didn't start famous. He started humble. You judged him based on what he looked like. But you miss who he is. The silence after that wasn't awkward. It was necessary. So, what do I do? Bradley asked. You don't run from it, his father said. You lean into it. You let it change you. The call ended with something Bradley hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. It wasn't full. It wasn't perfect. But it was the first stone in rebuilding something long broken. Asterisk. At 38,000 feet, Sundar sat with his hands folded, not reading the documents on his lap. The flight attendant had offered a drink, which he politely declined. He wasn't thinking about business right now. He was thinking about the look in that employee's eyes. He had seen that look before, not from others. From himself, in the early days, before everything changed. Once, in his 20s, he had walked into a meeting room in Stanford, wearing the same pair of worn shoes he had brought from India. Someone had glanced at them and then at him, and quietly shifted their chair to the other side of the table. They didn't speak to him the entire session. That moment had lived inside him like a secret scar. He had buried it. Now, watching the clouds roll by like slow rivers beneath him, it came back. He pulled out his phone, not to scroll, not to check email, but to write a message, not a public one, just a short note to his assistant. It read, please don't release the incident to the media. There's nothing to gain in humiliating someone who made a mistake. But I'd like to invite that employee to one of our leadership talks. Anonymously. Quietly. He paused. Then added, humility can be a powerful teacher. So can mercy? He pressed send. The next morning, Bradley woke up to an email from an anonymous address. It was short. You've been selected to attend a private leadership event on personal growth and ethics. Transportation will be provided. Participation is voluntary. No names will be used. Beneath the message was a quote. Sometimes the smallest gesture becomes the beginning of a new direction. He stared at the screen, uncertain. Was it a trap? A trick? A joke? But something inside him, a part he hadn't heard in a long time, told him this wasn't punishment. This was a path. He clicked accept. But he had no idea that what waited at that event would not just change his perspective. It would change everything. Not just for him, but for Sundar too, because someone else was watching. Someone from Sundar's past. Someone he hadn't seen in 25 years would be at that very same event, and they had a secret that could unravel the story of everything he had built. Asterisk the stranger in the room. Morning sun rose slow and pale over the conference center nestled at the edge of the Silicon Valley foothills. It wasn't a grand place, not the kind you'd expect for tech giants and executives. It looked more like a quiet retreat than a business venue. Tall windows with no curtains, pinewood floors that creaked when you walked, and soft chairs in a circle instead of rows. No podiums, no stages. It was a space designed for voices to meet, not for one to rise above the others. Bradley stood near the entrance in silence, feeling completely out of place. He had come early, arriving before the others, unsure if he even belonged. He wore a white button-up shirt, clean but simple, and his shoes still had a small tear near the sole. He had thought about buying new ones, but something told him not to. They felt honest. A soft voice greeted him from behind. First time. He turned to see a woman in her late 50s, her gray hair pulled into a loose bun, eyes warm but sharp. She wore no badge, no name tag, just a thin notebook clutched in her hand. Yeah, Bradley said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't even know what I'm doing here. She smiled gently. None of us do. That's the point. People began to trickle in, quiet, thoughtful, carrying nothing but notepads and uncertainty. There were no company logos, no introductions, just a few nods, some polite smiles. Bradley took a seat near the window. the sun casting long shadows across the wooden floor. The atmosphere felt more like a support group than a leadership event. Then the door opened, and Sundar walked in. There was no announcement. No one stood. No one clapped. He wore a plain navy sweater, dark jeans, and thin glasses. He nodded politely to a few people, then chose a seat directly across from Bradley. Their eyes met, but Sundar offered no sign of recognition, only a calm, patient gaze. It was a kindness Bradley didn't know how to return, so he looked away. Facilitator stepped forward. He didn't introduce Sundar. He didn't explain who anyone was. Instead, he simply said, "Let's begin with a story. One you've never told before." The silence that followed was heavy. And then, slowly, people began to speak. Some spoke of failure, others of fear. There were stories of betrayal, of regret, of the tiny decisions that changed everything. One used names. No one bragged. It wasn't about achievements. It was about truth. Bradley sat frozen for most of it, listening, heart pounding. Until, at last, he raised his hand. "I misjudged someone," he said, voice shaking. He walked up to me, and I looked at him and saw nothing, just a man in the wrong place. I spoke to him like he didn't matter. And then he told me who he was, and everything inside me collapsed. He paused, no one interrupted, but what shook me more than my mistake was his reaction. He didn't insult me. He didn't shame me. He looked at me like I mattered, even though I had treated him like he didn't. When he stopped speaking, Sundar looked down at the floor. For a long time, no one said anything. And then Sundar lifted his eyes. "Kindness," he said softly, "is never a weakness. It's a decision." Those words floated in the air like breath in winter. And then the facilitator stood and motioned for a break. As people stepped outside to stretch their legs, Sundar remained seated. Bradley hesitated, then walked over, unsure if he had the right. "Sir," he said carefully, "thank you for everything. I still don't understand why you didn't." Sundar turned to him, his eyes steady. "Because I've been you," he said, more than once. Bradley's throat tightened. "You have?" "I grew up with very little," Sundar replied. "I remember the first time I walked into an American boardroom. I was wearing a borrowed shirt, and the man across the table didn't look at me for 20 minutes. When he finally did, he spoke to me like I was the coffee guy." Bradley swallowed hard. "What did you do?" "I brought him coffee," Sundar said with a soft smile. "And then I gave a presentation that won the contract." They both chuckled quietly, and something inside Bradley began to ease. The knot in his chest loosened just a little, but the peace didn't last. Because in that moment, another man entered the room, tall, with dark eyes that flicked across every face. He walked with purpose, but not arrogance. His suit was slightly worn, his hair beginning to gray at the edges. Sundar looked up and froze. Bradley noticed. "You know him?" Sundar didn't speak for a long time. His face had changed. His posture, once calm, was now rigid. The man was speaking quietly to the facilitator, who nodded and gestured toward the circle of chairs. "His name is Mahesh," Sundar said finally, voice low. "We went to college together. He was the smartest person in the room back then, and now?" "I haven't seen him in 25 years, Sundar said. "Not?" "Since the day he accused me of stealing his work." Bradley blinked. "What?" Sundar looked away. "He believed I took credit for a design that he created. He told our professors, he told others, and when they didn't believe him, he left. He disappeared. And I never got the chance to explain what really happened." Bradley turned toward the man again. Mahesh now stood near the coffee station, pouring himself a cup. His hands were steady, his eyes unreadable. "Do you think he's here because of you?" Bradley asked. "I know he is," Sundar said. "And if he tells his story today, everything might change." Bradley wasn't sure what he meant by that, but he could see it in Sundar's face. This wasn't about a misunderstanding. This was about something buried. And now it was back. The room began to fill again as the break ended. The chairs creaked as people sat. The facilitator cleared his throat and said, "Who would like to share next?" Mahesh raised his hand. The air thickened like fog. Sundar didn't move. He simply watched as Mahesh stood and walked slowly into the circle. He took a breath, then spoke. "I once trusted someone who I thought was my friend," he began. "But he left me behind, and what I lost that day wasn't just credit. It was everything I believed in." Bradley looked to Sundar. Sundar didn't blink. "And now," Mahesh continued, his eyes scanning the circle, "after all these years, I found him again. And I came here today to see if he still remembers what he took from me." The silence was not empty. It was alive. Asterisk, the truth that was never told for a moment. Time didn't move. Even the wind that whispered through the pine trees outside seemed to pause, as if the world itself was listening. Inside the quiet circle of chairs, Mahesh stood in stillness, his voice hanging in the air like smoke. The others around him, executives, engineers, innovators, dreamers, had no idea who he was really talking about. But Sundar knew. And so did Bradley. Sundar didn't speak. His hands were folded, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were fixed on the man who once called him friend. Mahesh took another breath and continued. "We were students, young and hungry. We spent months working on a design for a new adaptive system. It was too ambitious, maybe, but we believed in it. We stayed up all night, missed meals, failed other classes just to make this one thing real. And then the day before we were set to present it, my files were gone, just vanished from the server. And the next day he presented the project, alone. His voice didn't shake. It was calm, deliberate, the kind of calm that hides an old wound still bleeding deep. Below, asterisk. I confronted him, Mahesh said. He said it was a coincidence that his version was separate, but I knew better. The code was mine. The architecture, the flow, it was everything I had poured myself into, and no one believed me. Not the professors, not the committee, not even our mutual friends. They looked at him, quiet and composed, and they looked at me, angry, emotional, and they believed the quiet one. The words stung, not because they were dramatic, but because they weren't. They were precise, shaped by time, sharpened by years of silence. After that, I left. He finished. I didn't just leave school. I left the field. I left the country. I walked away from something I once loved. And all these years, I thought I buried it. When I saw his name, when I heard about this event, I realized I couldn't move forward until I spoke the truth. He sat down, his breath shallow. The room remained still. The facilitator did not respond. He didn't comfort. He didn't guide. He simply allowed the silence to stay, giving the weight of the words time to settle. Then Sundar stood. He didn't rush, didn't shift in his chair nervously. He rose with the same quiet dignity that had marked every one of his steps that day. His eyes met Mahesh's, not with anger or defense, but something deeper, sorrow. I remember everything you just said, Sundar began, voice low but clear. And for 25 years, I have wished you had stayed long enough to hear my side. But you didn't, and I understand why. Mahesh stared, silent. You're right about our project, Sundar said. We built something together. It wasn't yours. It wasn't mine. It was ours. But the day before the presentation, I received a message from our professor. He said there were concerns about your academic record. He wanted me to present alone so that the panel wouldn't see the data as compromised. He paused. I refused. At first, I told him that the work was joint, that you deserved credit. But he said if you were involved, the whole submission could be rejected. The room had shifted. People leaned forward slightly, unconsciously, drawn to the tension between what had been and what might still be. So I made a decision, Sundar. Continued. I presented the project. I used our work. I kept your name off the slides, not because I wanted to erase you, but because they wouldn't allow me to include you. I thought I was protecting the work, but I was wrong. He looked directly at Mahesh now. I should have fought harder, or walked away with you. I didn't steal your work. But I let the system decide your value. And for that, I've carried guilt every day since. Mahesh blinked. His composure cracked, just slightly, like the first fracture in a pane of glass. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The room watched as two histories collided, as truth wrapped itself around old pain like roots around stone. You were the better coder, Sundar said. You were faster, more instinctive. I watched you solve problems in hours that took me days. I admired you, but I also envied you. And when they offered me the chance to stand alone, part of me didn't stop them. The confession was not loud. It was not defensive, it was a surrender. And in that surrender was the deepest kind of strength. Mahesh lowered his gaze, staring at his hands. The weight of the years hung between them, thick and real. And then he asked softly, "Why didn't you ever try to contact me?" Sundar sat again, slowly, "Because I thought you hated me. And I didn't want to face what you might say if you were right." Bradley felt his throat tighten. He had come here thinking he was the one learning a lesson. But now he was watching two men unravel decades of silence with nothing but the fragile honesty of spoken words. And now? Mahesh asked. Sundar looked around the circle, then back at his old friend. "Now I want to say something I should have said a long time ago," he said. He stood again, walked slowly to Mahesh, and extended his hand. "I'm sorry," he said. "Not just for what happened, but for the silence that followed it, for letting time grow between us like a wall." Mahesh stared at the hand. For a heartbeat too long, he didn't move, and then, slowly, he took a dot. It wasn't dramatic. No applause followed. The room didn't break into smiles. It was quiet, still, but something inside that silence broke, and something new began. After the session ended, the attendees moved outside, where the sun had climbed high, casting sharp light across. The retreat grounds, people mingled in small clusters, speaking softly. Sundar stood under a tree alone, sipping tea, his shoulders lighter than they had felt in years. Bradley approached him. "That was intense," he said. Sundar smiled gently. "The past has a way of catching up when you least expect it. But sometimes it's not there to punish you. It's there to test if you've grown." Bradley nodded slowly. "I don't think I've ever seen someone own their truth like that. You didn't try to defend yourself." "Because the truth is rarely simple," Sundar said. "I wasn't innocent. I wasn't guilty. I was afraid. And that fear made choices." For me, Bradley looked toward Mahesh, who now stood quietly at the edge of the group, looking up at the sky. He looked tired, but not bitter. "Do you think he'll forgive you?" Bradley asked. "I don't know," Sundar said. "But maybe it's not about that. Maybe it's about what we do next." They stood there in silence for a while, the breeze gently rustling the leaves above them. And then Bradley asked something he hadn't planned. "Would you ever tell this story in public?" Sundar turned to him. "Why do you ask?" "Because people think success is clean, polished, untouchable. They don't know how many broken moments live behind the scenes, and hearing this, it changed something in me." Sundar didn't answer right away, but he was thinking, because he knew now that stories, real stories, don't just change the people who tell them. They change everyone who listens. But somewhere far away from the retreat, another story was unfolding. A journalist had just received an anonymous tip, a video recording of the private session, and it had already been sent to a major news outlet. Asterisk, the story goes public story. Broke just after midnight. It started as a single paragraph on a small tech blog, tucked between articles about software updates and wearable devices. The headline was quiet. Almost unsure of itself. Private leadership retreat ends with emotional confrontation between two tech veterans, including Sundar Pichai. At first, no one paid attention. But by morning, the story had grown teeth. The blog post was shared, then reshared, then picked up by a larger outlet, then another, and then another. By the time Sundar woke up, his phone was buzzing with silent fury. Not just calls, but text messages, emails, calendar notifications, media alerts. Every app seemed to be demanding his attention at once. But he ignored them all. He already knew what they were about. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. The retreat had been closed. Private. A space built for honesty, not headlines. The rules were clear. No recordings. No identifiers. Just stories and silence. But someone had broken that promise. A hidden phone had been recording the session, and now the entire world was watching by noon. The video had gone viral. Not for drama, not for scandal, but for its raw, unfiltered honesty. Clips of Sundar standing, voice calm, confessing to the mistakes of his past, admitting envy, fear, silence, the kind of things leaders never say aloud. But now, he had and the world couldn't stop watching on one side. Praise flooded in comments applauding his humility. His courage, his refusal to shift blame. People shared their own stories of failure, of fear, of friendships lost in silence. Hashtag Truthing Leadership started trending on every major platform. But on the other side, the criticism came fast and cold. Some called it a calculated move, a publicity stunt. They questioned his timing, his sincerity. They dissected every word, looking for hidden motives, turning a moment of vulnerability into a battlefield of opinions. By evening, news anchors were discussing the story on live television. Not just tech outlets, mainstream news. Global coverage. The CEO of one of the world's largest companies had exposed a personal flaw. And now, everyone had a front row seat. Sundar stood by the window of his home, phone in hand, unread messages stacked like bricks. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just watched the sky darken as lights flickered on across the city below. Behind him. A soft knock came at the door. It opened before he could respond. His assistant peeked in, eyes full of questions. Should I prepare a response? She asked. He shook his head. Not yet. People are asking if it's true. It is. They're saying you admitted to stealing. Sundar turned to her, his voice steady. I didn't steal, but I didn't stop something that felt like theft. And sometimes that's just as damaging. She didn't know what to say to that. Miles away, Bradley sat alone in his apartment, the glow of his laptop screen painting his face in cold blue. He had watched the video 3 times, not because he wanted to, but because he needed to feel the weight of it again. He couldn't believe someone had leaked it. It had been sacred, private, a room full of trust. And now it was out there, dissected by people who weren't there, who didn't know what it felt like to be in that circle, but something else pulled at him. He remembered what Sundar had said under the tree, just hours before the leak. Maybe it's not about whether they forgive you. Maybe it's about what you do next. And now the world was asking that very question. What would Sundar do next? At that same hour, Mahesh sat in a quiet hotel room, the television muted but flashing headlines across the screen. Sundar. Pichai admits moral failure from college years tech leader, reveals long-buried truth in emotional retreat. Was this humility? Or strategy? Mahesh held the remote but didn't use it. He felt exposed, like a wound turned inside out for strangers to examine. His name hadn't been used in the clip, but those who knew the story were already reaching out. Old classmates, journalists, even former professors, all asking for his version. He could choose to speak now, to claim the narrative, to tell his side, loudly. But a strange stillness had settled in him. He hadn't expected Sundar to say what he said. He had come to the retreat for closure, maybe revenge, but he left with something else, something unfinished. And now the world had taken their private reckoning and turned it into content. He picked up his phone and called a number he hadn't dialed in over 2 decades. It rang once, twice. Then Sundar answered. I didn't leak it, Mahesh said without greeting. I know, Sundar replied. You wouldn't. There was a pause, heavy with unspoken truths. You should make a statement, Sundar said. Tell your story. People want to hear it. Mahesh exhaled slowly. They don't want the truth. They want to fight. Then give them something they don't expect, Sundar said. Give them grace, after all this time. Maybe because of all this time. Mahesh said nothing for a while. Then, finally, we should talk, not over the phone, in person. Sundar's answer was simple. Name the place. Next morning, a small article appeared online, buried beneath larger headlines. Mahesh Ramani, former classmate of Sundar Pichai, releases open letter on viral retreat video. It wasn't dramatic. There was no accusation, no defense, just a story. His story. He confirmed the pain, the confusion, the fallout from their shared past, but he also confirmed Sundar's version of events. He wrote about the moment he saw him again, the apology, the eye contact, the way 2 decades of silence were shattered by 7 words. I'm sorry for letting the system decide. And then he ended with a single line that stunned even the harshest critics. I may never forget what was lost, but I can choose what to build next. Sundar stood at his office window days later, watching as the frenzy slowly quieted. The video had stopped trending. The hashtags had faded. Another scandal had taken its place, as always. But something lingered. People had started running to his office hundreds of letters. Not about code or business, but about grief, fear, regret. Thousands of strangers who saw a reflection of their own mistakes in his moment of truth. A teacher who failed a student and never got to say sorry. A son who didn't speak to his father before he passed. Woman who walked away from a friendship instead of facing an uncomfortable conversation. And in every letter, one question repeated itself. What do I do now? And for the first time in a long time, Sundar had an answer. He began drafting something. Not a speech, not a press release, not a program, a quiet initiative, built on the idea that sometimes leadership means going back. Not to fix the past, but to learn from it. To teach others how to do the same. He called it the Second Circle, a series of retreats, workshops, and community circles for professionals at all levels to share not their successes, but their failures. Not to judge. To grow. But just as this new vision began to take shape, a new message arrived at Sundar's desk. This time. It wasn't from a critic. It was from someone inside his company. An executive. Subject line read, "You should know what's being planned behind your back." And what it revealed could undo everything he had worked for. Betrayal in the boardroom. Message was short, plain, no attachments, no dramatic language, just a subject line that struck like a match in a room soaked with gasoline. You should know what's being planned behind your back. Sundar sat at his desk in silence. The office, dimly lit by the gray light of a late evening. Outside, the city buzzed like it always did, cars moving, lights blinking, people living their lives unaware of the quiet storm building inside. The glass walls of one of the world's most powerful companies. He opened the email. It was from a mid-level executive he barely knew by face, someone buried deep in the product team hierarchy. The message was direct. A group of senior board members, backed by a few influential investors, had been meeting in secret. Their goal was simple: remove Sundar quietly, not through scandal, not through a firing, but through quiet nudges and procedural shifts, the kind that happened behind closed doors. They believed the retreat video, the open confession, the wave of public vulnerability had weakened his image. They feared the softness. They didn't say it aloud. They never would. But in their boardroom whispers, one word kept coming up. Optics. Not performance, not profitability. Just optics. To human. To expose. Sundar sat still for a long time. Then he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. For years, he had carried the weight of decisions that shaped billions of lives, algorithms, products, policies. He had learned how to navigate crisis, how to measure risk, how to say everything and nothing at once. But now he had said something real. And for the first time, it had made him vulnerable, not to the world, but to the people who sat across from him in high-rise conference rooms and smiled through their teeth. He opened his eyes and looked around his office. The awards on the shelf, the framed patent drawings, the photo of his family beside his keyboard, all symbols of what he had built, all things that now felt, in some strange way, like relics. Then he opened another tab on his screen. The draft of his initiative, the Second Circle. It was nearly complete, ready to launch. ready to reshape not just his company, but how leadership was taught across the industry. He stared at the words on the screen. Leadership without honesty is just performance. And performance ends the moment the audience looks away. He had written that line 2 nights ago after receiving one of the hundreds of letters that poured in from strangers. It came from a teenager in a small town in India. The boy had failed an exam, felt ashamed, and thought about giving up. Then he saw the video, saw Sundar's story, and something shifted. If someone like you can admit you're not perfect, the boy had written, then maybe I don't have to be perfect either. It should have been a small thing, but it wasn't, because that's how real change begins. Not with grand gestures, but with quiet cracks in the surface. Sundar closed the laptop, stood, walked to the window. Then he picked up the phone. The emergency board meeting was called for the following morning. 11 members. A mix of long-serving executives, newer faces with investor ties, and 2 empty seats filled only with silence. The mood in the room was stiff, polite, artificial. Sundar entered. Last, not in a tailored suit. Just a simple dark sweater and slacks. He didn't sit at the head of the table. He sat in the middle. He didn't bring lawyers. He didn't bring advisors. He brought one thing only, his story. I know why we're here, he said calmly. You think the video damaged our image? You think I've made the company look weak? Number. One responded. But no one denied it. I understand that fear, Sundar continued. We're trained to believe leaders must be flawless, must never show uncertainty, must never admit failure. He paused, his eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. But what kind of future are we building if the people guiding it are pretending to be perfect? A few shifted uncomfortably in their seats. You're afraid we'll lose investors, he said. But we've gained trust. Do you know how many applicants we've received in the last 72 hours? Not because of our salaries, not because of our offices. Because they saw something human, something real. Someone on the far end cleared their throat, as if preparing to interrupt. But Sundar didn't stop. I didn't come here to defend myself, he said. I came to offer you a choice. He pulled out a thin folder and slid it across the table. Inside was the official proposal for the Second Circle initiative, a copy of the mission, the first 3 pilot programs, a budget, partnerships, testimonials, letters. Proof. He stood. You can remove me quietly or not. And maybe things go back to how they were. Another CEO, another cycle. Maybe no one notices. He paused. Or you can let this be the beginning of something different. A company that leads not just with innovation, but with integrity. Silence? Thick, stretching. Make your decision, he said. But know this, I don't fear being replaced. I fear building something great and having it stand on nothing. He turned, walked out. Left the folder behind. 3 days passed. No calls. No statements. The media had begun to speculate. Was he stepping down? Was he forced out? On the 4th day, the board sent an official message. We stand behind Sundar Pichai and his continued leadership of this company. We are proud to support the launch of the Second Circle initiative because the future of innovation must include the future of humanity. No fanfare. Just words. Asterisk, but they meant everything. Weeks later, Sundar stood in front of a small group at the first Second Circle retreat. The room looked a lot like the one where all began. No stage, no microphones, just chairs, stories. Silence. But now others were leading. Bradley among them. Mahesh too. What began as a wound had become a bridge. After the session ended, Sundar stepped outside. The sky was wide, soft with clouds. A gentle wind stirred the trees. A teenager stood nearby, holding a notebook, eyes wide with awe. The boy from the letter, he had come. He walked up to Sundar, nervous, trembling. Asterisk, sir, he said. Do you think I could be a leader one day, even if I've already failed? Sundar smiled. Not as a CEO, Not as a legend dot, but as a man who had been broken and chosen to build anyway. Asterisk.